It's strange how a single question, a few simple words can divide an entire lifetime into before and after. I remember that moment as vividly as if it were a movie projected in slow motion, every detail sharpened by adrenaline and uncertainty. The room was flooded with the familiar hum of everyday routine. Low voices, the distant scent of coffee, sunlight filtering through the blinds. Around me, faces I had known for years seemed calm, unsuspecting, wrapped in the comfort of certainty. I sat there, feeling both part of the group and somehow adrift. The weight of my own thoughts pressing against my chest. For as long as I can remember, belonging had been both my shield and my anchor. The community was more than a place of worship. It was my home, my extended family, my measure of worth. Within those walls, I had learned the language of loyalty and trust, absorbed the rules spoken and unspoken that bound us together. There were rituals for everything, for celebration, for mourning, for forgiveness, and for silence. Each tradition was a thread in the tapestry of our shared identity, a reminder that we were united against a world we saw as threatening and lost. Yet, as I gazed at my friends, their voices echoing in the background, I could not ignore a growing sense of unease. It began quietly, like a draft seeping under a door, almost invisible but impossible to ignore. It was the subtle tightening of a rule, the shift in a leader's tone when questioned, the way stories were told to inspire unity but sometimes left uncomfortable silences. I pushed these doubts away at first, reminding myself that everyone stumbles, that no community is perfect. But doubt, once seated, is relentless. It finds its way into every crack. The day it happened, I woke up before sunrise, restless and aware that something was changing inside me. My reflection in the bathroom mirror seemed older, my eyes shadowed with questions I could not yet name. Breakfast was a blur. Even the laughter of my children, usually a comfort, felt distant. Like a memory I was watching from outside myself. The meeting. The topic was familiar. The importance of faith, the value of obedience, the dangers of outside influences. I listened, nodding at the right moments, reciting verses with practiced sincerity. Yet, as a leader spoke about unquestioning loyalty, I felt a knot in my stomach tighten. I glanced at those around me and wondered if anyone else noticed the contradictions in his words, the gentle dismissal of doubt, the way honest questions were recast as threats. It was then, with my heart racing and my hands cold, that I raised my voice. My question was simple, maybe even naive. Why can't we discuss these doubts openly? Isn't seeking truth at the core of our faith? The room fell silent, the air thick with shock. Eyes darted away from mine. A few stared in disbelief. I saw hurt, confusion, and most of all fear. Someone coughed nervously. The leader's face hardened, a polite smile masking his irritation. In that moment, I realized I had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The meeting ended quickly after that. I walked home in a fog, replaying every second, every look, every word. Guilt gnawed at me. Had I embarrassed my family? Had I risked everything for nothing? Yet beneath the anxiety, there was a strange current of relief. For the first time in years, I had spoken aloud what had haunted me in silence. That evening, sat alone in the half-dark, replaying the events. Shadows stretched across the floor. My phone buzzed with messages, some supportive, others distant, or even accusatory. The house felt smaller, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. My wife tried to comfort me, but I saw the worry in her eyes, the question she didn't ask. What happens now? In the days that followed, I became aware of the subtle shift in my world. Friends hesitated before meeting my gaze. Conversations ended abruptly when I entered the room. It was as if my question had cast a shadow over everything, exposing the fragility of our unity. I realize that courage is rarely glamorous. It is lonely, confusing, and often comes with a heavy price. Yet, as fear began to mix with resolve, I understood that the journey had only just begun. The real challenge would not be surviving the fallout, but learning to live honestly in its aftermath. This was the price of courage, the willingness to lose everything rather than betray myself. And as I prepared to face what lay ahead, I knew that my story was no longer just about a question. It was about the cost and the quiet, stubborn hope that something better might grow in the ruins. As the first hints of dawn crept across the horizon, I found myself wondering, not with fear, but with a wary sense of anticipation, what life could become when belonging was no longer tied to silence. Before doubt seeped into my life, there was routine, and with it, a comforting sense of certainty. My days unfolded in patterns so familiar I could have traced them blindfolded. The mornings began with quiet rituals, the smell of fresh coffee, the gentle clatter of breakfast plates, the low hum of voices weaving through the kitchen as sunlight spilled across the table. My family and I bowed our heads in prayer before each meal, giving thanks not only for the food but for the stability our faith and community offered. In those moments, it seemed nothing could go wrong. The community was my extended family. We celebrated births, mourned losses, and marked milestones together. Week after week, we gathered for meetings in a hall that felt as much a second home as the house where I slept each night. The walls were lined with memories, children's drawings from Sunday classes, photos from community events, framed quotes that reminded us of our mission and shared purpose. Laughter and song filled the air during gatherings. Stories were exchanged and encouragement flowed freely, especially for those struggling or facing hardship. I reveled in the camaraderie of shared faith. There was a bond, forged through years of service and sacrifice, that ran deeper than blood. I knew the birthdays, favorite foods, and secret dreams of dozens of people. My own family was an anchor. My wife, always supportive and patient. My children, curious and bright, looking up to me as both father and role model. The elders, wise and approachable, guided the group with gentle firmness. The younger members sought advice, eager to emulate the unity they saw in us. Every handshake, every shared meal, every word of encouragement reinforced a sense of belonging that was as nourishing as bread. From the pulpit and in private conversations, we were taught that our group was unique, a chosen family separated from a world adrift in confusion. This us versus them mentality was not always explicit, but it colored every interaction. We spoke of outsiders with both compassion and caution, eager to welcome, but wary of influences that could disrupt our harmony. Questioning was permitted, but only within the boundaries set by tradition. To doubt too openly was seen as dangerous, not only to oneself, but to the entire community. Unity is strength, the elders would say, and I believed it. For years, I buried my personal uncertainties, content to trust in the wisdom of those who had walked the path before me. My sense of self was entwined with the community's approval. Success was measured in acts of service, in public displays of faith, in visible dedication to the group's principles. I was proud to be known for my reliability, my willingness to help, my readiness to volunteer for any task, no matter how humble. This pride, while genuine, was also quietly laced with fear. The fear of disappointing those who looked up to me, of failing to live up to the high standards expected of all members, especially leaders. It was not all pressure and conformity, though. There were countless moments of joy: picnics in the park, late-night conversations after meetings, the comfort of shared grief when tragedy struck. During holidays, our homes overflowed with guests. Laughter echoed long into the night. Children played in the yard, while the adults swapped stories and debated friendly points of doctrine. I remember teaching my son to ride a bicycle with a crowd of cheering neighbors, watching my daughter perform in a holiday play as the community applauded. These moments, ordinary as they seemed, were the threads that wove our lives together. Looking back, I can see that even then, small fissures existed beneath the surface. I sometimes witnessed the quiet frustration of those who didn't quite fit the mold. The single mother, the questioning teenager, the new arrival still learning the unspoken rules. Occasionally, whispers of dissent floated through the air, swiftly quieted by a reassuring elder or a gentle rebuke. If I noticed a rule that seemed inconsistent or a story that didn't quite add up, I dismissed the discomfort as a personal failing. After all, everyone else seemed content. If I tried harder, prayed more, surely my doubts would dissolve. The unspoken expectation was clear. Loyalty meant not only following the rules, but embracing them wholeheartedly. Individual desires were secondary to the good of the group. If someone left or was removed, it was mourned as a loss, but also accepted as necessary for the greater good. Better to lose one than to risk the many, the elders would sometimes say. And I nodded in agreement, not realizing how those words would echo in my own life one day. My role in the community grew over time. I was entrusted with responsibilities organizing events, teaching, offering support to those in need. Each new task was both a vote of confidence and a reminder that I was under constant watch. When disagreements arose, they were handled discreetly, always in the spirit of reconciliation. Or so I thought. I took comfort in these routines, finding meaning in my place among people who seemed to truly know and care for me. Our shared history was a shield against loneliness, a guarantee that no matter what happened in the world outside, we would face it together. I believed that this unity was unbreakable, that nothing could threaten the foundation we had built. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, my certainty began to shift. It started with small, private questions. Why did we treat outsiders with suspicion? Why did some rules change while others were inviolable? Why were doubts greeted with unease rather than curiosity? These questions were easy to ignore at first, drowned out by the noise of daily life and the warmth of belonging. Yet, as time passed, they gathered strength, collecting in the corners of my mind like dust in a long and opened room. I see now that the seeds of doubt were always present, hidden in the cracks of an otherwise solid foundation. They grew quietly, watered by the contradictions I witnessed but chose not to acknowledge. It would take a single, pivotal moment to questions spoken aloud to break the surface and change everything before that day. Though life was simple, predictable, and full of meaning, the comfort of community, the pride of shared identity, the rhythm of faith, they carried me through years of both joy and sorrow. I believed with every part of myself that this was where I belonged. That belief, I would soon discover, was both my greatest strength and my greatest vulnerability. If I close my eyes, can still feel the tension of that day pressing against my chest, kind of pressure that made every sound sharper, every color more vivid, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The meeting hall looked the same as always. Rows of chairs neatly arranged, the faint aroma of polished wood, and the soft, expectant hum of voices blending in the air. Children played quietly in the corner, oblivious to the gravity that hung over the adults. I found my usual seat near the front, surrounded by friends and family. But nothing felt usual about that moment. The topic for the meeting was familiar. But there was an undercurrent, something unspoken pulsing through the congregation. The elder at the podium spoke about loyalty and obedience, weaving stories of past troubles that were resolved by unwavering faith. He spoke with practiced assurance, but behind the confidence I sensed anxiety. It was as if he, too, knew that something was bubbling just below the surface. My hands fidgeted in my lap. I felt eyes on me, not just the casual glances of friends, but a quiet, watchful expectation. The air felt thick, laden with the anticipation of a storm no one dared name. My mind raced with questions I had tried to suppress for weeks, maybe months. Questions about leadership decisions, about how conflicts were handled, about why certain topics were never discussed openly. The more I tried to silence them, the louder they grew, until my heart hammered in my chest and my breath came shallow and quick. When the floor was opened for questions or comments, there was a brief, tense pause. For years, I had contributed, eagerly sharing thoughts, encouraging others, offering gentle corrections. This time, though, my words felt different. They pressed at the back of my throat, heavy with risk. I heard myself ask, why are we discouraged from asking questions about our teachings? Is seeking understanding not a sign of true faith? The words seemed to echo in the sudden hush that fell over the hall. For a moment, no one moved. The elder's face froze in a polite smile, eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. Some members looked down at their laps, pretending to study notes. A few glanced at me, alarmed, as if I had triggered an alarm they'd all forgotten was there. The silence stretched on, heavy and electric. My wife's hand squeezed mine under the table. Her grip was tense, her jaw set. Then, with the measured calm of someone trained to extinguish flames before they spread, the elder responded. His words were smooth, even soothing, but carried an unmistakable edge. Brother, unity comes from trust in our leaders and in our established teachings. Too many questions can lead to confusion and division. We must remember the wisdom of the organization and have faith in its guidance. There were polite nods, murmurs of agreement. The atmosphere, though, had changed. Something fragile had snapped. And everyone knew it. The meeting wrapped up quickly after that. No one lingered to chat or joke as usual. People filed past me with carefully neutral expressions. Some avoided my gaze altogether. My closest friends offered tight smiles, pats on the shoulder that felt perfunctory, not comforting. I walked home with my family in uneasy silence, my children picking up on the tension without understanding its cause. That night, the doubt that had been my secret companion became a wall between me and the world I had known. My mind replayed the scene over and over, every glance, every word, the quiet censure in the elder's voice. Guilt gnawed at me. Had I been reckless? Was it selfish to want clarity, or dangerous to want honesty? My wife tried to reassure me, but I could see the fear in her eyes. We both knew, without speaking, that something fundamental had shifted. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle changes. Conversations with friends were shorter, punctuated by awkward pauses. A few people checked in with me privately, encouraging me to let it go and trust the process. Others, once warm and familiar, kept their distance. Even my children sensed the change, asking why their friends' parents no longer invited us for meals or gatherings. I tried to carry on, as usual. But I felt exposed, like a raw nerve, vulnerable and alone. Sleep became elusive. I would lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, questions looping through my mind. Was I the only one who saw the contradictions? Or was everyone simply better at hiding their doubts? I wondered what would happen next if my question would be quietly forgotten, or if there would be consequences for breaking the unspoken rule of silence. One afternoon, a trusted friend pulled me aside. He spoke in hushed tones, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "You have to be careful," he warned. "The elders don't like anyone challenging them. You're risking more than you realize." His words, meant to protect, filled me with dread. The threat was real, even if it was cloaked in concern. For the first time, I truly understood how tightly fear and loyalty were bound together in our community. It was not enough to obey, or at least appear to. The space for honest questioning was narrower than I'd ever realized. The cost of stepping outside it, I was beginning to discover, was higher than I could have imagined. Still, as the days stretched into weeks, I found that I could not return to silence. The question I had asked, once spoken, had become a part of me, It followed me into every conversation, every prayer, every quiet moment alone. It was both a wound and a spark. Painful, but alive. Possible to ignore. What I did not know then was that this was only the beginning. The act of asking had set events in motion that could not be undone. My faith, my relationships, my very identity were about to be tested in ways I never expected. But in the quiet aftermath of that forbidden question, I felt amid the fear. An uncertainty, a glimmer of something I had not felt in years. Hope that the truth, whatever it turned out to be, was worth pursuing. Even at great cost, the days and weeks after the forbidden question felt like living beneath a darkening sky. One in which every movement, every word was scrutinized, weighed, and recorded. At first, I tried to convince myself that nothing would change, that the community I had given my life to would forgive a single moment of honest doubt. But the chill in the air was unmistakable. My question had become a whispered warning, passed from ear to ear in corridors and kitchens. It began with subtle gestures. My friends, once quick to greet me, now hesitated before meeting my eyes. Small groups would fall silent when I approached, then resumed their conversations in muffled tones as soon as I moved on. Invitations to social gatherings, dinners, and study groups once regular and even routine began to disappear from my calendar. When I did attend, I found myself seated at the edge of the room. Conversations drifting away from me like smoke. The elders, usually approachable and paternal, shifted their stance. One afternoon, I received a request to meet privately. The room was uncomfortably warm. 3 elders sat across from me, faces grave, hands folded on the table. "Brother, we are concerned," one began, his tone measured but cool. "Your recent questions have caused confusion among the congregation. We urge you to be cautious with your words and to place your trust in the organization's wisdom." The others nodded, reinforcing the warning without ever raising their voices. Their message was clear. Unity was prized above all, and my curiosity was becoming a threat. In the following weeks, these conversations multiplied. Each meeting felt more like an interrogation than a pastoral visit. They asked about my prayer life, my loyalties, my reading habits. Are you struggling with personal issues? Is someone influencing your thinking? The implication was always the same. Doubt was not only unwelcome, was contagious, a disease that needed to be contained before it spread. Behind closed doors, I tried to defend myself. My faith is not weaker because I have questions, I argued. Isn't? True belief strengthened by honest examination. But my words seemed to vanish in the air. The elders were polite, but their eyes were hard. "Some things are not meant to be questioned," they repeated. "The path of obedience is the safest one." Outside these rooms, the social pressure mounted. Old friends offered coded advice. It's better not to dwell on such things. Don't give people reason to talk, and sometimes barely veiled threats. I heard rumors that my leadership roles might be reconsidered. That my family's reputation was at stake. My children came home with stories of classmates whispering about our family. And my wife faced awkward questions from friends who suddenly seemed more interested in our private affairs. There were moments of kindness, too, but they were tinged with anxiety. A few people reached out in secret, sharing their own silent doubts or offering quiet words of encouragement. Yet even these conversations were fraught with risk. "Please, don't mention this to anyone," one confidant whispered. "I can't afford to be seen questioning things." The solidarity was comforting, but it was also a stark reminder of how fear governed our lives. The surveillance wasn't just social, it became institutional. I noticed elders at meetings watching me more closely, noting my attendance, my participation, the content of my prayers and comments. My contributions, once welcomed, now drew polite but guarded responses. Even my body language felt monitored. A sigh, a hesitant glance, a pause before answering. everything could be interpreted as a sign of disloyalty. As weeks passed, the weight of isolation grew heavier. I found myself second-guessing every word I spoke, every gesture I made. The warmth of community had become a chill of suspicion. I tried to keep my routine intact, attending all the meetings, volunteering as before, but nothing felt the same. The comfortable rhythm of my life had been disrupted by an invisible, unrelenting pressure. My family suffered as well. My wife, once the heart of our social circle, withdrew from gatherings, weary of the pointed questions and frosty receptions. My children, confused and hurt, asked why their friends were no longer allowed to visit or why whispers followed them through the halls. At home, the silence was thick with unspoken worries and restless nights. In quieter moments, I wrestled with anger and regret. Why was seeking truth so threatening? Why was my loyalty questioned simply because I wanted to understand more deeply? The community that had once felt like a sanctuary now resembled a fortress, its walls growing higher each day. I found myself mourning the loss of simple, joy-shared laughter, spontaneous conversations, the easy camaraderie of people who once called me friend. And yet, beneath the sorrow, a new clarity was emerging. Each attempt to silence me, each warning and subtle punishment only confirmed the need for honest dialogue. The group's response was no longer a mystery, was a pattern, a system designed to protect itself from anything that might disrupt its carefully constructed order. The repression was not just personal, it was cultural, institutional, embedded in every tradition and every rule. The most painful realization was that the fear was not just theirs, was mine, too. I saw how I had once shunned those who asked uncomfortable questions, how I had enforced silence in the name of peace. The roles had reversed, and now I was living the consequences I once helped to create in those darkening days. I learned that repression does not always come with raise voices or public condemnation. Sometimes it is a quiet exclusion, a gentle but relentless pressure to conform. The punishment for thinking differently was not a dramatic exile, but a slow erosion of trust, companionship, and meaning. I spent long nights sitting alone, wrestling with shame and uncertainty. Was it worth it? Could I endure the cost of honesty? I missed the comfort of belonging, yet knew that returning to silence was no longer possible. My journey had crossed a threshold. The only way forward was through the storm, and in that storm, I began to see dimly, but undeniably the outlines of a new self. One who would rather face isolation than betray his own conscience. One who, despite the cost, was learning to live in truth, even if it meant walking alone. The road to expulsion is rarely sudden or explosive. It is a slow, suffocating tightening of process that, from the outside, can appear almost orderly, even humane, but from within feels relentless and inescapable. For weeks, I lived in a kind of limbo, neither fully inside nor entirely cast out, haunted by a sense of inevitable exile. It began with a formal invitation to meet with the elders, an invitation I could not refuse. The message was polite but unmistakably grave, wrapped in the kind of official language that signaled there would be no easy way back. I arrived early, my heart pounding, hands clammy with nerves. The meeting room was prepared, a circle of chairs, a table with water and notepads, the atmosphere heavy with expectation. 3 elders faced me, their expressions sober, eyes searching for signs of repentance. The conversation started with pleasantries, but quickly turned to the matter at hand. "We're here because we care for your soul," one elder began, his voice measured and practiced. "There have been concerns raised about your recent questions and their impact on the congregation. Unity is fragile, brother. It must be protected." The others nodded, their faces a mixture of concern and resolve. I tried to explain myself. I spoke of faith, of my desire to understand and to grow, of my belief that honest questions could Strengthen, not weaken, our community. My words were met with patient smiles, but their meaning slid off the surface, unacknowledged. We understand that everyone struggles at times. Another elder replied, but your persistence has caused confusion. You must choose. Trust in the wisdom of the organization or risk being separated from it. The meeting stretched on, a cycle of accusation and defense, apology and warning. Each attempt I made to reason, to plead for dialogue, was met with subtle resistance, gentle reminders that obedience was the highest virtue, and that too much inquiry bordered on rebellion. At one point, an elder read aloud passages about the dangers of division, about wolves in sheep's clothing, about the consequences of sowing doubt. I recognized the implication. To question was to threaten the flock. There was no shouting, no table pounding, only the quiet, suffocating certainty that my fate was already decided. The elders offered me a chance to recant, to publicly reaffirm my loyalty and accept guidance. They urged me to apologize, not just for the questions, but for the spirit of questioning itself. If I did, perhaps there would be forgiveness, a way back into the fold. But I could not bring myself to deny what I knew, to pretend that my doubts no longer existed. I left the meeting exhausted, hollowed out, but strangely resolved. Over the following days, the process accelerated. I was asked to attend another meeting, time with a larger council and a few witnesses, people I had known for years, now present to observe and confirm the proceedings. There was a sense of ritual in the air, a script that everyone seemed to know, but no one acknowledged. I was questioned about my conversations, my private thoughts, even my prayers. Have you shared your doubts with others? Have you encouraged dissent? The implication was clear. Even silent questioning was a form of disloyalty at home. The tension was unbearable. My wife wept quietly. My children avoided my gaze. We spoke in hushed tones, careful not to say anything that could be overheard or misunderstood. The walls felt thinner, the world outside closing in. I tried to comfort my family, to assure them that truth would win out. But my own faith was fraying. Then came the official letter. Its language was formal, almost called expressions of regret, reminders of past contributions, but a clear statement that I was no longer considered a member in good standing. Until you are willing to accept guidance and reaffirm your loyalty, you are to be separated from the congregation. Further contact will be limited. The words stung, not only for their finality, but for the way they erased years of service, friendship, and shared struggle with a single decision. News of my expulsion spread quickly. At first, there was confusion. Friends reached out, unsure what to believe. Some expressed quiet sympathy. Others distanced themselves immediately, afraid of association. The stigma was immediate and profound. Where once I had been welcomed, I now sensed doors quietly closing, conversations ending when I entered the room. My family felt the chill as well. Our social calendar emptied, invitations disappeared. Casual greetings became formal nods or awkward silences. The psychological toll was immense. I felt stripped, not just of community, but of identity. The rituals and routines that had anchored my days were suddenly forbidden. Even the simplest acts, attending a gathering, offering a greeting, sharing a meal, became fraught with uncertainty and pain. My children struggled to understand. My wife, though steadfast, wrestled with her own grief and fear. Despite all this, there was also a strange, bittersweet freedom. The finality of expulsion removed the pressure to conform, to pretend. I was no longer caught between two worlds. I was outside, undeniably, but also able to begin the slow work of rebuilding. The sense of shame and loss was sharp, but it was accompanied by a quiet relief, the end of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Looking back, I realized that expulsion was not a single moment, but a process, a series of small cuts, each one drawing me further from the world I had known, each one forcing me to confront what truly mattered. It was the death of an old self and the uncertain, fragile birth of someone new. As I stood on the threshold of my new life, no longer sheltered by the community, no longer silenced by free I understood that the road ahead would be long and difficult. Yet, in the clarity of exile, I felt a glimmer of hope, the belief that honesty, even at great cost, was the only foundation upon which to build again. And so I stepped forward into the unknown, heart heavy but unburdened by pretense, ready to face whatever came next. The first days after expulsion were a blur of silent, heavy vacuum that seemed to swallow all color and movement from the world around me. I wandered through my house like a stranger, unsettled by the unfamiliar quiet. Gone were the constant calls, the flow of visitors, the background noise of shared life. The routines that had defined my days preparing for meetings, reviewing lessons, checking in with friends had vanished overnight, leaving only restless emptiness at first. I tried to fill the silence with simple tasks, cleaning, organizing drawers, tending the garden. Yet each action felt hollow. I would catch myself preparing for some gathering or reaching for my phone to check a meeting time, only to remember that those rituals were no longer mine. My body moved out of habit, but my heart was lost. The loneliness was a physical ache. I missed the warmth of shared laughter, the comfort of familiar voices. The sting of rejection cut deepest in moments of stillness, sitting at the kitchen table, looking at empty chairs. Lying awake at night, replaying the last words spoken. In the elders' meeting, my children sensed the tension, growing quieter and more withdrawn. My wife, brave for their sake, wept when she thought I was asleep. I was unprepared for the suddenness with which the community closed its doors. Friendships I'd believed unbreakable faded with barely a word. Some sent brief messages. "I'm praying for you. I hope you find your way," but most retreated into silence. Encounters on the street were marked by awkward nods or deliberate avoidance. The fear of contagion, the idea that my doubt, my rebellion, might spread, was stronger than any bond. With every day that passed, the sense of exile grew. I stopped going out except for errands. I avoided places where I might run into old friends. Even in public, I felt exposed, as though everyone could see my shame. The world beyond the community was vast and anonymous. I was unmoored, without bearings, adrift in a sea of unfamiliar faces. At home, grief settled over us like a fog. Meals were eaten in silence. The children, once lively, tiptoed around as if afraid to disturb the sadness. My wife tried to reach me, but I struggled to speak. We moved through our days as ghosts of our former selves, haunted by the memories of belonging. Nights were the hardest. Sleep eluded me. Instead, I lay awake, trapped in a loop of regret and self-doubt, wondered if I could have chosen differently, if humility or silence would have spared my family this pain. I replayed every conversation, every decision, searching for the moment when it all began to unravel. The certainty I'd once had was gone, replaced by a howling emptiness. The world outside continued, indifferent to my suffering. I watched neighbors go about their business, families gathering for celebrations, laughter drifting through open windows. The sharp contrast between my isolation and their normalcy deepened my sense of loss. I missed the rhythm of community, the sense of purpose that came from shared goals. As the weeks dragged on, the loneliness became suffocating. I longed for someone to talk to, someone who would understand, who wouldn't see me as a cautionary tale. But reaching out seemed impossible. The shame was too fresh, the wound too raw. I feared judgment, pity, or worse, indifference. My only solace was in late-night walks, when the streets were empty and I could lose myself in darkness and motion. Depression crept in, slow and relentless. The simplest tasks felt insurmountable. I lost interest in reading, in music, even in food. My thoughts circled endlessly around the question, who was I now without the group? Stripped of my title, my duties, my place in the world, I struggled to find any sense of identity or worth in rare moments of clarity. I recognized that what I mourned was not just the loss of others, but the loss of myself. I had been shaped so completely by the expectations and affirmations of the community that without them, I felt formless, undefined. The abyss was not only external, it was within me, a vast darkness where faith and certainty used to live. I tried fitfully to climb out. I read stories of others who had walked this path, people who had left tightly knit communities, who had faced exile and found new meaning. Sometimes these accounts gave me hope, a sense that survival was possible. More often, they seemed distant, the victories of others unattainable from where I lay in my own darkness. I wondered if I would ever be whole again, or if the exile had broken something in me that could not be repaired. Yet, even in the deepest part of the abyss, something within me refused to surrender. On my longest, loneliest nights, I found myself talking to the silence, sometimes pleading, sometimes raging, sometimes simply begging for a sign that this pain would not last forever. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was a refusal to let go of the possibility of hope. Slowly, tiny changes began to emerge. I started to write down my thoughts, first in scattered fragments and later in fuller sentences. Putting words on paper gave form to the chaos inside me. The act of naming my grief, my fear, and even my anger allowed me to stand outside them for a moment, to see them as something I was experiencing, not something that wholly defined me. There were setbacks. Some days I could barely get out of bed. Other days, a wave of longing for the old life would leave me gasping. I avoided the rituals and reminders that might reopen wounds, choosing instead the small comforts that were left watching the dawn. From the back porch, the warmth of my wife's hand when words failed us, the laughter of my children when they forgot, even briefly. The weight that hung over our home very gradually. I began to search for new anchors. I explored books and forums where others discussed their own journeys out of high-control groups. Sometimes I reached out tentatively to a stranger online who understood the strange mix of freedom and terror that came with being cut loose. I discovered that, though my pain was unique, I was far from alone. A crucial moment came when I allowed myself to grieve not just the people I'd lost, but the version of myself that could never return. I sat in the quiet of my living room, eyes closed, and mourned for the certainty I once had, for the sense of purpose that had given shape to my world. The tears came hard and hot, but afterward, I felt lighter, as if I'd set down a burden I didn't know I was carrying. The path out of the abyss was neither straight nor swift. I made mistakes. I clung to old patterns, hesitated to trust, recoiled at kindness for fear it would vanish. But little by little, the world expanded. I began to recognize moments of beauty, a patch of sunlight on the floor, the taste of fresh bread, a song on the radio that stirred something I'd thought lost. I took my first tentative steps toward new connections, even as the shadow of my past lingered close behind. With time, my home began to feel less like a prison and more like a refuge. My wife and I relearned how to talk not about what we'd lost, but about what we might build. My children, resilient and forgiving, began to let laughter back into our lives. We made new routines, rituals of our own invention, small but significant gestures that said, "We are still here. We are still family." By the end of that first season in exile, I could not say I was healed. The wounds remained, tender and easily reopened. I could see, at last, the possibility of another life defined not by what had been taken from me, but by what I might choose, create, or rediscover. I was still lost, still sometimes adrift in the void, but no longer sinking. And as the days lengthened and the light slowly returned, I realized that surviving the abyss had changed me forever. I would never again belong as unquestioningly as I once had, never again find comfort in conformity or silence. But perhaps, in time, I could learn to belong to myself in that recognition. Faint but real lay the first fragile seeds of hope, the beginning, perhaps, of a new journey out of darkness and toward something like wholeness.